Hello, and a very warm welcome to this session on identifying and supporting learners and supervisees who challenge us. The aim of this session is to help you explore the factors which can impact our supervisees so that we can recognise early warning signs and identify those that need some additional support. We can also stratify the level of risk or concern and consider strategies to help them. So I'd like to invite you to take a moment to consider, what is supervision? What's your understanding of what educational supervision is, whether you've been a supervisor or a supervisee, formally or informally. You can pause the recording and then start again when you are ready. So this is a lovely holistic definition of supervision. Talks about supervision as provision of guidance and feedback on matters of personal, professional and educational development, and remembering this is in the context of the trainee or supervisee providing safe and appropriate patient care. Do either of these vignettes resonate with you? A supervisee who's disinterested in general practice, or late and missing deadlines? Perhaps you will have some of your own that you can hold in mind as we go through this module. You can pause the recording and read through them, and then restart when you are ready to continue. If there are issues, it is important to identify the problem early and validate your sources. Consider a risk assessment. Can you stratify the concern? Is it high, medium or low? Make sure you don't avoid having the conversation, and we'll talk about factors that can impact performance and also transactional analysis, a model about power and dynamics. And then it's essential to keep factual and accurate documentation so that if needed, you don't fail to fail. We'll explore each of these areas in the rest of this module. Take a look at the 7 early warning signs. Have you seen or do you recognise any of them in your supervisees, or maybe in the supervisee vignettes we showed you earlier? Pause the recording for a moment and to review them, and restart when you are ready. The disappearing act may present as frequent sick leave or not being able to find someone at the surgery when they should be there. Low work rate can present as being slower or seemingly less productive, like Supervisee B in the vignettes. They may be prone to outbursts of anger or bypassing certain colleagues, and also quite rigid in their approach. You might find they have difficulties with exams or uncertainty about their career choice, and potentially a lack of insight or a rejection of constructive criticism. So, having identified issues early, they now need stratifying, grading the seriousness of the risks or concerns we have. Starting at the bottom, low risks like lateness, minor miscommunications or gaps in knowledge or portfolio, especially if they are one-off incidences and the supervisee is responsive to feedback, don't need to be escalated and can be managed in-house. Medium risk concerns, you do need to have some honest conversations and discussions with your supervisee. They need to take on the responsibility of how they will tackle this so that they can become more self-regulated and help themselves. It's important that you don't take the whole onus as a supervisor on yourself, but support them to do what is needed. And finally, if there was a very serious or high-risk concern regarding patient safety, then this is the sort of thing that would need to be escalated quickly to the relevant training program directors. Do you know who they are for all of your supervisees? Let's take a step back and think broadly about the why, the bigger picture. The Supervisee A and B vignettes give two different examples, and as we mentioned before, you're likely to have examples of your own. There are a huge number of factors that can impact the performance of our supervisees. We can consider the attributes of the person, the attributes of the training, personal pressures at home or their health, and the context of the training and the setting we work in. In 1964, Eric Berne, a psychiatrist, published the book Games People Play: The Psychology of Human Relationships. This model of transactional analysis that he described is used by Oscar, who run the Coaching for Health courses across North Central London. It is used to understand the dynamic of power and responsibility. It helps us to recognize emotions in others and handle in relationships. Everyone can be in one of these three states: the parent who takes responsibility for the child, and or the child who gives up responsibility for the parent. The adult takes responsibility for themselves, leaving space for someone else to take responsibility for themselves if there are two people in the relationship. So have a think, what's your usual experience with supervisees? I imagine you might say that you're in parent to child, and of course adult to adult is what we are aiming for. Adult to adult ensures that responsibility, autonomy and well-being of your supervisee is paramount. If there's a crisis or they're unwell, maybe that isn't possible and it may be more appropriate to take on a parental role temporarily. So, how do we get from parent to adult? We can build safety and rapport. We can ask questions. We can be curious about what's important to them. What can they do to build and develop their own responsibility? It doesn't guarantee adult to adult for you and your supervisee, but it does, however, provide them space to move up if they are able to. So let's take a moment to think what we can do as supervisors, how we have these discussions. What sort of words might we use? What might be helpful before there's an issue? And who else might it be useful to discuss issues with at the outset? You can pause and I'll give you a moment to jot some ideas down. You can use the workbook that is provided if that's helpful. Here's a collection of some thoughts and tips. So we think it's important that you set the expectations and the ground rule right from the start. That you might want to ask, how do you prefer to receive feedback and have supervision, and ensure it's a regular developmental conversation with lots of opportunities to touch base and check in if additional support is needed, whether it's for you or for your supervisee. And when you're having challenging conversations or what might feel like challenging conversations, giving feedback using I statements might help. Like, I noticed, or I was wondering, I wanted to ask what you think might help. And again, thinking about how you triangulate and calibrate with other colleagues and get information to see and signpost if a supervisee is struggling so that they feel supported, whether that's in-house or to a professional services unit. So, why might it be difficult for us to fail our supervisees? There are so many different reasons. We'd invite you to have a think about your own experience and reasons that you can come up with. You can pause the recording here and write the answers down in the relevant workbook. Restart when you are ready. Here's some of the reasons that were presented at an NHSE lunchtime webinar with Dr. Roo Shah and colleagues. We may consider the failure a reflection of ourselves. We may choose not to see the difficulties in the learner or supervisee. And we might think that the systems won't support our colleagues. I'll let you look through the list and see what you recognise or what stands out for you. You might also want to consider, is there a difference if it's verbal versus written assessments, whether it's in the middle versus the end of training or placement, and whether it's a clinical or a professional issue. So here's a summary of what we've covered in this session. I will give you a moment to read it yourself and consider what your main learning and takeaway points were. So here's your final opportunity to jot down and solidify your learning, and you could pop it down in your learning workbook. What was the one thing you learnt today? Was there anything you wanted to revisit or explore in more detail? And what will you do differently because of this learning? And to end, here are some resources and further reading. We hope you find them useful.